Welcome to Relocare's Swedish Business and Cultural Training Seminar, where we will provide compact and essential information about Swedish business culture, Swedish way of communicating, Swedish management and intercultural training. My name is Bodil Lundberg. I'm born in Sweden and I have been living in multiple countries since, both in Vietnam, Singapore, Italy, Norway and Denmark. I have spent years working in international companies, traveling with work and experience living in Vietnam as a following expat spouse. My educational background is a Bachelor in International Business and a Master in Communication. Relocare have for the past 11 years been working within intercultural training, covering many countries. We have worked within relocation, global mobility, immigration, taxation and social security. We are hence highly experienced in both the practical, legal and retention requirements needed to secure a successful relocation or a successful cross-country teamwork. We have a huge business experience and all our intercultural trainers has, just like me, been living or working as managers or sales managers in the countries that they represent. At first, I would like to introduce to you a very successful cornerstone techniques. First, we have the definition of trust and respect and density. How do you gain it? Every day and several times a day, you are valued by your colleagues and your surroundings. All your actions, your body language, such as your gestures, your facial expressions, and your posture, the way you use your tone of voice, your mimic and your eye contact, etc. These are all valued and or judged. Therefore, it is important to understand that there are also cultural differences in these non-verbal areas of communication. When we are able to read these signs, we can use it to our advantage and understand the complete message of what someone is saying to us and enhance our awareness of people's reactions to what we say and what we do. We can also try and use it to adjust our body language so that we appear more positive, engaging and approachable in their way of communicating. One of the things we ask people when we do cultural training is what is trustworthy about you? What most people will say is something that I'm punctual, I stick to my word, I keep deadlines, but all these are layers that first appear when they get to know you. The truth is, it starts much sooner, and within seconds they decide if they can trust you. So, for example, when you walk into a room the first time, or if you are at a job interview, or if you are in a sales meeting with the Swedes, why should they trust you? In a matter of seconds, it's actually defined and is very much based in your non-expressive behavior, such as your body language, your mimic and your eye contact as mentioned before, and also in the way that you communicate. The definition of trust and respect is highly culturally defined. One very important thing that is important for the Swedes is the eye contact. Especially in job interviews and in meetings, we like to have eye contact. And it's our way to find out if you're trustworthy or not. The Swedes do not use a lot of hand gestures in the communication. To express what they say, we rely more on non-verbal communication. So, what happens if our trust is broken, and can you regain it? One example to make a non-trustworthy situation with a Swede is actually to hide your mistakes. Not talking about your mistakes, not addressing it, or trying to hide them is one of the things to do if you want to become non-trustworthy. Both you and the Swedes can be sure to make mistakes. What defines a culture is how you actually regain respect once you've made them, and how long it takes to get the respect back. Even if possible, if even possible. In Sweden, you regain respect by being honest about them and admitting to them. And the best is actually to solve the mistake and turn it around and make it into something positive. Also, the last cornerstone of our culture is how do you share knowledge in a culture? A Swedish manager, for example, might not always be able to answer your questions because they might not be an expert in all areas, but they are actually very good at managing a team. So if a manager can't answer your question, they will make sure that they find someone that can. Either by calling them up in the middle of the meeting or inviting some expert in. A person that actually have the knowledge that we're after. So that the question that you have could be answered. Knowledge sharing is key for good collaboration in Sweden. In order to exercise your knowledge, it's also important to know that cultural training has a different learning curve than normal. The learning curve will normally go like this. For example, if you're learning Swedish, a new language, you will start learning a few basic words as a hello, or when you go grocery shopping, how much is this, and so on. And then your brain in a certain stage will not be able to absorb anymore. Hence, you will saturate. Then again, when you learn more words or learn more knowledge, it will go up again, and then your brain will saturate again. This is the normal learning curve when it comes to a skill frame. However, when it's cultural or cognitive learning, the curve will go different, as a theoretical man called Young Yoon Kim. This will actually go like a spiral, the learning curve. So in the beginning, you will think, okay, I got this, and you will feel confident and secure and feeling that you have actually adapted to the new culture. And then something happens and you will feel insecure again. And this goes in curves, so to speak. Another way to explain that is actually by this model, where we have a baseline here. And when you come to a new country, you will find yourself in what we call the honeymoon stage. The honeymoon stage is where you find everything exciting. And even if you are, for example, driving your car to work and you're in a traffic queue, you will just look around and think that your surroundings are beautiful, and you won't mind that you're actually stuck in traffic. We also call this the tourist stage, because everything is new to you. However, after a while, for example 3 months, you will actually be driving the same queue to work, or you will be stuck in traffic, and you will not see the beautiful buildings anymore. You will just see the car in front of you, and you will be quite annoyed. And that is when you are past this honeymoon stage. What also happens that when you're past this honeymoon stage, you might come into a situation where your car breaks down. And you call your colleagues and your manager, who is actually the closest people that you know. And they tell you excitedly, you should just call the car service tow truck that comes and pick your car up. And you feel helpless and lost because you thought that they could help you and they would come out to where your car broke down and help you. So you might find a little bit of a culture shock, because the Swedish people are actually not very private outside work, which you might find out. Maybe you're used to coming from a culture where they are private outside work. So you will find yourself in a culture shock situation. But then you will adapt again. and come up in here in another stage. After 12 to 14 months, you might find that you will come into a depression or isolation stage. And that is almost for sure if you hit the Swedish winter, and if you've been there for 14 months, you will hit the Swedish winter, which is cold and very hard, and it becomes very dark early, around 4 p.m. And you might feel very depressed and isolated where you are. And to overcome this, the good thing is that in Sweden we work, and our work hours is between 40 to 48 hours, which means that you have a lot of time, spare time after work, which gives you a rich opportunity to actually do sports, leisure activities, or do an extra course in the evening, or spend time with your family, and which is very, very positive. Swedish are very active in their spare time, and they like to keep healthy. And that's where there's a good opportunity to actually to bond with your colleagues if you are a member in a sports club or at a gym where they are going as well. Swedish people distinguish between their working life and private life, and hence they value their spare time a lot. Also, you might find that Swedish people have a different schedule than in your own country and where you come from. For example, Swedish people like to meet at or come into work around 8 o'clock and leave about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because also they have flex time in a lot of places. Hence, if you're used to working, maybe coming in at 10 o'clock, for example, if you're from France or other countries that does that, you will maybe have to adapt to the Swedish way, as when you come in at 8 o'clock and the day starts, you will have a rich opportunity to actually talk with your colleagues over a coffee break in the morning and talk about how their day before was and what they're gonna do, etc. So the coffee breaks are very important. They have these coffee breaks at least 3 times a day, and it's called the fika. What I also want to mention is that the reason why we're also showing you this is that we want to give you tools to not come into these very deep culture gaps, so to speak. So we want to prepare you for the Swedish culture, so that the culture shock won't come so deep down, and you won't feel isolated or depressed when these 14 months has actually passed. Let's move on to the topic of the Swedish management. Swedish management style is decentralized and democratic. They tend to rely on compromise and consensual decision making, and Swedes prefer if ideas are discussed openly. And therefore, a lot of meetings might be held with many different people before any decision is reached. When the parties involved has agreed and understand every little detail of the product and project, it will be easier to work as a team towards a common goal. One can say in general that taking decisions on a group level assures employee comfort. The non-hierarchy nature of these meetings means that everyone present at the meeting can have his or her turn of speaking their mind. This also means that decision time can take some time to be made and can be delayed. Foreigners making business or sales in Sweden might find this decision making going into lengthy discussions at first, because every little details need to be discussed, and it might take more than 6 months to enter a deal. But once the deal are made, they will be implemented rather quickly. In this process, it's actually important for the counterpart not to rush anything or be impatient. Also, after a meeting, or for example, after you contacted some persons for a sale prospect, it's important to know that you might not hear from them for 2 weeks. But that doesn't mean that they're not interested. That just means that need to have consensus in regards to if your business proposal is relevant. It is important to note that all verbal agreements are binding in Sweden. Hence, it's very important to acknowledge that words are actually taken very seriously. And you shouldn't make any agreements without being serious about it. In addition, written contracts are of course signed too. This is to confirm the verbal agreement that you made, but also act as a legal document in case that you run into a conflict. You might want to, for example, follow up with an email if you have done a verbal agreement, just to make sure that you understood it as they did as well. In case that a topic is potentially leading to a conflict in a business meeting, a Swede can abruptly change the subject to avoid this. Swedes are among the Scandinavian countries the most conflict-avoidant inhabitants, and conflicts are therefore rarely seen at meetings. Issues are dealt with on a general level and not on an individual level, to make sure that the cooperation and the teamwork is functioning. It is not essential, but in general in Sweden it's very nice to be introduced by a third party. When being introduced, you should shake your hand firmly with the person that you're introduced to and look them in the eye. Keep your eye contact. Also, maintain a distance with the person that you're introduced to. Swedes like to keep a personal distance. And if you want to keep it safe, you should avoid hugging and kissing on the cheeks, like in some countries, like in France, and touching. When introduced to more people in a meeting, you should actually always wait till you're introduced by the person you're with, and you should shake hands with every single person in the meeting, both when you come into the room, but also when you leave the room. At the meeting, it's very wise to start off with a soft start. Start with presenting yourself, your business, and what you can offer. Also, if you have references in earlier work, you can mention it. Then you slowly move into the topic to why you are here. Swedes are very good listeners. They are curious and interested in what you have to say. Business card is often given at the initial meeting, so always remember to bring them in case. Sweden is known for an informal culture. In the way that they address each other, they will always call a single person that you. When they address you, even if you are, if you have a higher status than them. So regardless of status, age, or social class or sex, they will always address you as you. Unless, of course, you're the queen or a member of the royal family. The dress is a combination of conservative and casual. Dress code can vary from company to company, of course, and for geographical location and which setting that you're in. But in general, conservative, smart, casual is the dress code, the typical dress code in Sweden. If you want to keep it safe, you can wear jeans and a night shirt with a jacket over. When foreign business managers come to Sweden to make business, they might find adapting to the informal Swedish style a little bit difficult, as the Swedish managers as well can dress similar to their employees in order not to stand out so much. And it might be difficult to tell who the manager is and who is the employee. Swedish people keep their private life and their work life apart, unless that you actually know them better. Swedes do not do small talk, but keep private life separate from the meeting room. And therefore, it's not considered as an appropriate topic to actually talk about your private life in a meeting room. Expressions and emotions are also kept to a minimum, which can seem a little bit reserved for a foreigner perspective. If you should want to lighten up the situation a little bit with a joke, you should keep it very safe. Do not joke about religion, sex, political views, or even salary you shouldn't joke about. And do not make fun of the people in the meeting room or the business associate A Swede would rather make jokes about themselves or use a little self-irony than make jokes about any other people. Swedish communication style is in general direct and open. Swedes are very good listeners, they're friendly, open and curious, as mentioned before, very interested in what you have to say. In a meeting, it's considered polite to wait until it's your turn to speak your opinion instead of interrupting, which is considered very rude. Negative feedback is never provided in front of others. In a communal office areas or in a meeting is viewed as as a lack of respect. Criticism or negative feedback should be kept in private between the parties and should be kept to the point, so you don't need to repeat it. As a Swedish learn English from a third grade or as they are 9 years old, the Swedes know the English language very well, and therefore it's often used in the business meetings, so you don't have to worry about not being able to speak Swedish. Swedes do not like exaggeration, so try not to boast your title or your work. In Sweden, we have a concept that is a fiction law called the Jante law, which I could tell you a lot more about, but this presentation we will keep it a little bit more short. Well, it's enforced throughout the society, and basically it means that it advises people not to brag or boast themselves above others or their achievements at all. So you should avoid that, and you should also not display power towards a Swedish business person that you're in a meeting with. In regards to relationships, Swedish people find it important to create very deep relationships with the managers, and it's valuable to them that the collaboration between the colleagues also works well. Therefore, you don't see many conflicts in a Swedish workplace, but it's always solved by negotiating and compromising. You will find that there will be a lot of meetings with the Swedes, so that they take the time getting to know you as a potential business partner. It takes time and effort to gain the trust and getting in a good relationship with the Swedes. In the beginning, meetings tend to be very formal until they become more familiar with each other. Initially, meetings is normally primarily used for the purpose of getting to know you and your company and considering your proposal. It will take several meetings before decisions are reached, so you need to prepare yourself for that. As Swedes are very structured, it's important that you should always arrive on time. Swedes view lateness in both social interaction but also in a business interaction as rude. But it can be accepted if you have several or more meetings in one row and that you need to attend to, as long as they are aware of that. They will usually don't mind it. If you're late, you have to say you're sorry, and if you're very late or more than 5 minutes, you call in advance and prepare them that you will be late. Normally, you should schedule your meetings in around 14 days in advance. And in regards to meetings, some cultures that come to Sweden might be used to breakfast meetings. Breakfast meetings to start the day. In Sweden is not very common to have breakfast meetings. Normally, neither in the afternoon either. Normally, it's 10 a.m. in the morning or at 2 p.m. and not later than 2 p.m. So it's recommended to schedule the meetings at these times. Also remember that the lunch is very sacred for the Swedish. You normally between 11:30 and 1:30 they will take an hour lunch, and these are very sacred, so you cannot book any meetings in between this time. And sometimes offices are also closed in these hours. Business lunches are not unusual, and that could be a nice way to have a meeting with the Swedes. During the holiday season between June and August, it will also be difficult to book a meeting as most of the Swedes will actually be on holiday. Also in February, they will have a week they call the sport vacation, where they normally go skiing. Skiing is a very popular sport in Sweden as well. And there you should actually plan this, that if you're doing a project with a time line, you should know that these vacations, and you should implement these vacations in that timeline, that you will not be able to do meetings there. They do not like to work overtime or in the weekends as well. One word that you will hear all the time in Sweden is actually the word lagom, which translates into something in between not too little and not too much, or everything in moderation. The concept is seen throughout Sweden and the Swedish culture. And in work environment, it means that they focus on doing exactly what is needed and doing it well and avoid doing unnecessary things. In a private setting, it can mean, for example, how was your weekend? Lagom. It means that it was okay, or not too much and not too little exciting. In one way in particular, Swedes are opposite to most cultures, and that is in our motivation, and that comes down to our welfare system. What I'm going to show you now is the Maslow pyramid. You might know this pyramid from before. Here you see the essential and basic needs in the bottom of the pyramid is that what you need the most, and that is food, water, sleep, etc. In our normal day-to-day life, Swedes have a completely different reaction pattern than most cultures, mainly due to a very well-developed welfare system in Sweden. Swedes are less afraid of losing their jobs compared to other nationalities. If you lose your job, your children will still go to school, and you're still able to put food on your table. You might not afford the fancy car, but if you lose your jobs, it's felt less severe due to the welfare system on the economic scale. If I, for example, tell you you're fired, you will lose your job. Many people will think about, how will I get food on the table? How can I provide a shelter or the roof over my daughter's or children's head? For Swedes, they will feel more on an identity level. What will my colleagues say? What will my friends say? And my family? And it's more based on their identity. How you can use this is in management, is for motivation. How do you empower a Swede? You give them more responsibility and acknowledge their performance. This is why motivation in Sweden needs to be thought in a different way, and why we in Relocare claim that the Maslow need pyramid needs to be reversed. If you want to keep your employees in Sweden, you need to treat them with respect, and you need to care for their work-life balance. In Sweden also, the majority is actually part of a union. And a union works different from many other countries, as they regulate essential parts of the Swedish work market. They have collective agreements between union and employer organizations that cover matters of fair wages, employer pensions, insurance, and annual leave. In other countries, the relationship between a union and a government or private sector can often be seen as tense and hostile. However, in Sweden, these two parties are often working together or intertwined and far less confrontational. This gives the Swedes an extra safety net at work, and to ensure that they are treated fair and have a fair agreement with their employers. So, moving into a different area, we will now talk about what is intercultural competence and when is one actually intercultural competent? It is very important to say that cultural competent is not a skill and it's not something you're born with. It's a cognitive development frame, which means that everybody can actually learn to be intercultural or have intercultural empathy. What is also important to state, and this sentence is from Dr. Milton Bennett, is that intercultural competence is actually the capability to shift cultural perspective and adapt behavior to cultural commonality and differences in an authentic way. What is also important to say, and which is also stated here in the next section by Dr. Mitchell Hammer, is that when stress and tension rises, or when things just goes too fast, one tends to fall back to childhood learnings. And that means that we go back to what our parents taught us in regards to being polite or having good behaviors and so on. In Relocare, we actually distinguish between two situations when we are teaching. The question is always, what do you want to achieve and what do you want to sell? And in these situations, you actually have to adapt to the way that the culture where you're selling or having a job interview, etc., is. So if you want to sell in Rome, act like the Romans. If you go into a meeting room, as a French, for example, and go into a meeting room where you need to sell to a Swede, you need to act Swedish. You do that by observing or matching the body language, not interrupting, waiting till it's your turn to speak, and all the other things that we actually mentioned in this presentation. It is important that you adjust your communication style and become more Swedish in your behavior. It is not something you can change in your everyday life. However, at a meeting, try to adapt the way you communicate, and you will become more successful in your business sale adventure. It is a practice and as something that you need to become good at and practice, and it's not something that is done overnight. The opposite actually happens when you are in a team situation where the team consists of different nationalities. Here it's important to actually adapt a third culture and lay out guidelines in the way that you communicate. So what is punctuality, and how do you communicate by email? Do you put the manager on a CC, or do you not put the manager on a CC, etc.? In some countries, putting the manager on CC in an email would mean that a conflict is coming up. However, in some countries it's normal, as in Poland, for example, it's normal to put your manager on CC. Hence, the guideline among the team will actually be used in order for appropriate communication. You actually just form a written third culture. This brings us to the final stage in our presentation, and that is in regards to language and communication. So here you're looking at person A and person B. In order for person A to say the word tree, he or she either needs to have a feeling or a sound, or mostly a visual picture of a tree. Person B, when hearing the tree, will also either get an image, sound, or feeling. This is actually how our brain works. From a cultural perspective, and here is also a cultural filter, as you see in the middle, a Swedish perspective might be visualized, the tree might be visualized as a pine tree. However, from a Brazilian perspective, it might be visualized as an orange tree, palm tree, or banana tree. So the visuals differences might also be very different when communicated. This is especially complicated when you add value to the words, such as value-added words such as safety, punctuality, flex time, and more. What is safety for a Swede, and what is safety for a Kenyan? What is punctuality for a Swede, and what is punctuality for a French or an Italian, and so on. Be sure that you always ask, if you're in doubt, what it actually means to the person that you're talking to. So this is the end of the presentation. It has been a pleasure to give you some good advice of making business in Sweden. It has been a little bit short and intensive, and should you want more information from us, you could go to www.relocare.dk. Thank you for listening.